What if I told you World War III had happened and you didn't even realize it? Imagine a world where the stage has been set, the players are ready, and tensions are simmering. We're living in a time where global politics are more volatile than ever, with countries balancing on the edge of conflict daily. The current global climate is a high-stakes chessboard. The kings and queens of our world, our nations, are delicately positioning their pawns, ready to strike. Geopolitical tensions are not just whispers in the wind anymore. They are loud, echoing through the halls of power, potentially igniting the fuse that could start a third world war. Picture this, a hypothetical World War III. A war not fought with soldiers and tanks but with information manipulation and cyber attacks. A silent war happening right under our noses. A war that you might not even realize has already begun. Stay tuned as we delve into the cataclysmic events of World War III. It all began with a spark, a small incident that lit the fuse to a global conflict. Much like a matchstick ignites a bonfire, a series of seemingly insignificant events set the stage for World War III. Let's rewind a bit to the initial conflicts. As it often does, it began with political differences, economic instability, and territorial disputes. Tensions between nations were simmering beneath the surface, like a volcano waiting to erupt. These were not just ordinary disagreements. They were deep-seated issues, buried under years of diplomatic pleasantries and strategic alliances. The first domino to fall was a territorial dispute, a small piece of land insignificant to many, but a symbol of pride and power to those involved. The dispute escalated, with neither side willing to back down, each claiming the land as their own. As the situation worsened, alliances were tested, and nations were drawn into the conflict, like moths to a flame. Next, economic instability played its part. The world was already grappling with financial crises, and when trade sanctions and embargoes were imposed, economies started to crumble like a house of cards. Countries, once prosperous and powerful, found themselves on the brink of collapse. This economic turmoil fueled resentment and desperation, providing the perfect breeding ground for conflict. And then, there were the political differences. Democracy versus autocracy, capitalism versus socialism, nationalism versus globalism. The ideological divides were too deep to bridge. Leaders, blinded by their ambitions and ideologies, led their nations down a path of destruction. As these conflicts intertwined and escalated, the world stood on the brink of a catastrophe. Diplomatic talks failed, peace treaties were thrown out the window, and the drums of war began to beat louder. It was a chain reaction, a deadly domino effect. Each event, each conflict, each decision was a link in the chain that would ultimately lead to the outbreak of World War III. And thus, the world was plunged into World War III. The sparks had ignited, the fuse was lit, and the world was set ablaze. It was a war unlike any other, a war that would change the course of history forever. Now, imagine a world in chaos, nations battling against nations, every corner of the globe affected. World War III was not confined to a single theater or front. It was a truly global conflict, with battles raging from the high seas of the Pacific to the heat of the African deserts, the frosty plains of Siberia, and the teeming cities of Europe and Asia. Major battles erupted in unexpected places. In the heart of the Amazon rainforest, where the dense foliage sheltered armies, and in the remote Arctic Circle, where the harsh climate was as much of a foe as the enemy soldiers. War strategies evolved drastically, with cyber warfare and space-based weapons becoming the new norm. Nations sought not only to overpower, but to outsmart their opponents, leading to a constant game of cat and mouse on a global scale. The war wasn't just fought on the battlefields. Civilians found themselves on the front lines, their homes turned into battlegrounds, their lives disrupted in unimaginable ways. Cities were razed to the ground, and once thriving communities were reduced to rubble. The human cost of the war was staggering, with millions displaced and countless lives lost. The global economy, too, took a severe hit. Trade routes were disrupted, markets crashed, and resources became scarce. Countries that were once economic powerhouses found themselves on the brink of collapse, while others, which had been on the periphery, seized the opportunity to rise. In the midst of this chaos, there were also stories of resilience and hope. Communities came together to rebuild, individuals rose to become heroes, and in the darkest of times, the indomitable spirit of humanity shone through. World War III was not just a war of nations, but a war of ideologies, a war of resources, and a war for survival. It tested the limits of human endurance and ingenuity, and the scars it left are still visible today. World War III was a war like no other, reshaping the world as we know it. In the aftermath of the war, a new world emerged from the ashes. A world forever scarred yet resilient, forever changed yet persisting. As the dust settled, nations faced the daunting task of rebuilding, not just their infrastructure, but their very identities. The peace treaties that came into effect were unlike any seen before. Nations, once enemies, now sat on the same table, negotiating not for power but for peace, for coexistence. These treaties were not about winners or losers, they were about survival, about ensuring that such a devastating conflict would never happen again. And then came the process of rebuilding. It wasn't just about erecting structures and restoring economies, but about mending the deep wounds that the war had inflicted on societies. The world had seen destruction at an unimaginable scale, and it was now time to heal. In the reconstruction process, the world saw an unprecedented level of cooperation and unity. Nations helped each other, setting aside their differences, recognizing that they were part of one global community. This unity was not born out of choice but necessity, a stark realization that in a globalized world, no nation could stand alone. The aftermath of the war also brought about a seismic shift in the world order. Power was no longer concentrated in the hands of a few, but was dispersed. Economically, the world moved towards a more equitable distribution of resources. Socially, societies became more inclusive and tolerant. Politically, the world was reshaped. The old order gave way to a new system where decisions were made collectively, where power was wielded responsibly. Nations realized that unilateral actions could lead to catastrophic consequences, and so, they opted for diplomacy and dialogue over aggression and conflict. But the aftermath was not just about rebuilding or reshaping, it was also about remembering the cost of war, the lives lost, the devastation caused. It was about learning from the past, about ensuring that history would not repeat itself. World War III changed our world forever, but it also taught us valuable lessons. Lessons about the futility of war, the importance of peace, and the power of unity. Lessons that we must never forget, for the future of our world depends on it. The scars of World War III serve as a stark reminder of the devastating effects of global conflict. This war, hypothetical though it may be, has imparted on us some profound lessons. It underscores the importance of diplomacy over brute force, of conversations over confrontations. It's a testament to the fact that peace, not war, is the ultimate winner. We've learned that international cooperation is not just a lofty ideal, but a necessity for our survival. In a world that's more interconnected than ever, we cannot afford to let our differences divide us. Rather, we should embrace them, learn from them, and use them to build a better, more harmonious world. World War III has shown us the cost of failing to do so, and it's a price we cannot afford to pay again. World War III was a dark chapter in our history, a chapter we must never repeat.